Greetings and salutations. Unfortunately for you, I'm back with another video. Uh, you'll have to kind of bear with some of the heavy breathing I do, and like the nasally and sound of my voice and the scratchiness in my throat. I'm not sick. Those of you that kept up and you know me in my personal life. Me and my family went to Florida on vacation. Back on August the 2nd, we got back last week on August the 9th at about 8:30 at night. So, me trying to acclimate back to our more temperate weather, to put it mildly, uh, in the Appalachians, it's been a little bit of a struggle because of all the saltiness of where we were staying down there on the Emerald Coast in Destin. So, um, yeah, I'm fine. I'm not sick. I know I sound it, but I'm not. So, uh, I'm going to sound a little funny in this video. So I've been wanting to talk because I had a product come in today. There were two books that were supposed to come in with this, but they haven't come in yet. They're coming in later this week. Hopefully I'll be able to showcase them later. And I want to preface this by saying I haven't really gone through all the material in this book yet. This is basically like first impressions from skimming through it, uh, because it's a cool part of the hobby's history. I'm not the first to cover this product. There are many channels that that have done this already, and they have done it better than I have. This is just me kind of like giving my thoughts, my impressions on the thing, and uh, I actually sent a picture to Steve Fugit, showing where I got it, and it interested him. It piqued his interest because I know he's definitely a fan of White Box. Uh, so who's not? Besides people who are wrong, but anyways, uh, so this piqued his interest for obvious reasons, and I'm going to talk about it, and that is, of course, The Lost Dungeons of Tonisborg by Greg Svensson. And I want to say immediately that I love the artwork in this book. Let me go to my favorite picture. Aha, there it is. This is my favorite picture. Like that, doesn't that just scream old school adventure? That just screams you're about to have a good time. This is, for those of you who don't know, this is a Blackmore setting book, and the cool part is you can run this as its own game, and I'll explain that a little later. But this was written by Greg Svensson. It was he made it for the Blackmore setting back in the day. He was one of the Blackmore bunch. He played with the Blackmore bunch, and he talks about Dave Arneson running them through, and them playing chainmail. And then of course Arneson giving them the original Dungeons and Dragons rule sets that came out after he and Gary worked together on it. And we go into that history of the hobby. I want to preface this by saying that I love Gygaxian fantasy. I really do. I love the craziness that Gygax would come up with, and I absolutely love the things he came up with for the hobby. I have been told that a lot of my stuff resembles Blackmore. The first thing that I was told when I got into this hobby, I posted one of my. This is actually the original hex map. I just I basically copied it down to this because the page was worn out. But that's the original Anglovan, which is my campaign setting. I haven't put all the details in yet, but I was told whenever I was first starting to become a GM, I posted looking for critiques and stuff like that to try to get better. By some old schoolers, like, your stuff looks a lot like Blackmore style kind of stuff. They're like, are you inspired by Arneson? Because I see a lot of Arneson in there. And at the time, I had heard Arneson, but I wasn't familiar with Blackmore. I wasn't familiar with Arneson's work, and it's just one of those things that I'm going to give Arneson his dues, because I would say between him and Gary, Arneson probably inspires me more, simply because his style is kind of more up my alley. I love Gygaxian stuff. I really do. I love the craziness of some of the magical stuff he's come up with. Okay. That being said, like, there's something more grittier about Arneson stuff that I tend to favor. That's not to say that Gary didn't have nothing gritty. I'm just saying that there are styles to this that I kind of favor Arneson more in some things, even though I felt like Gary was a better writer, note taker, and organizer, and like he made stuff that just read better. Uh, Whereas Arneson is definitely more of a feel, you know what I mean, for lack of a better term, and an aesthetic. So I tend to favor Arneson in a lot of that stuff. That being said, uh, it's one of those things where you could run this by itself, or if you run a Blackmore setting, you could run it like this in a Blackmore setting. But you could also include it into anything that you already currently run. So, first things first, this has a lot of Greg Svensson's original, photocopies of his original notes and map drawings. So, like, there's a map that he drew, and here's some of his notes. And now, stuff like that is cleaned up in the back, so like you could actually play it. So here's some notes, and here's your map. So like, and like, I want to really zoom in on that map, because like it's definitely like recreated to be cleaner. That way, like, you have grids, you know, like how big the room is, for example. Uh, that being said, uh, I'll get to this point here in a second. It it very much does not lend itself to like VTT style play if you're into that. So I want to go ahead and mention that first and foremost. But I'll get into the style of play that I think it works best for later on. So first and foremost, what are you getting in this book? So you get like some introductory I can't talk. Introductory stuff like respecting one's boundaries and expectations, and for those of you that had like a knee jerk reaction, this is very much middle of the road kind of thing. It's not really like a hardcore like X card rule, like safety rules and safety tools and da 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 da, and social contracts. It's not really that. It's kind of like, it echoes a lot of what we've been saying for years. That being said, I'm not a big fan of like an article like that being included myself, because I'm just one of those guys. It should be an unspoken thing, and the only time I think that it's even remotely desired is in convention play, where you might be playing with some strangers. But that being said, I love the format and the layout and the font choices, because like even in the rule the table of contents, as you can see, it's like that classic old style. Like this is very much, everything about this is old school. Everything about this screams like 1970s. So you have like the welcome to the history. There's an article by Greg Svensson in here, talk about his interactions with Dave and the Blackmore bunch, and how he came up with Tonisborg and the dungeons. You have how to breathe life in new life into an old dungeon. You have scenario in here. Here's some focus events and rolling and stuff like that. And then you have like the dungeon itself with all of its stuff. You have a treasure table in the back, and then of course your appendices and book of spells and stuff like that. But I also want to say the most important part about this book is on page 96, and we'll cover page 96 here in a minute. But this very much screams, like I said, very much screams old school. Everything in here is so clean, and this is definitely not a dungeon that's going to hold your hand. Now, I mentioned that it wouldn't really hold up in a VTT setting. As you can see, a lot of the maps take these weird, crazy, odd angles, And indeed, I don't think they would really lend well to even miniature play that much. I do like the fact that a lot of floors have rooms and passageways that are not connected, but are kind of like transitory between one floor or the other, kind of places. But this is you got 10 levels of a big mega dungeon. There are rules for restocking it, and so on and so forth. And there's plenty of. It's a fun house dungeon. And so if I do plan on running this one day, that being said, I don't know if I would use miniatures. Instead, I've always favored Theater of the Mind, mostly because I'm a cheap little miser, but also because this kind of thing, if you were going to make a miniature dungeon for it to run, like you would have to make your own. Like I don't think you're going to find a dungeon set that's going to have the walls that are going to make these crazy odd angles like that. I just don't see it. And like I said, I don't see this being very feasible in VTT. So it would very much be a Theater of the Mind thing. Uh, you would definitely need a mapper. And I'll talk about the dungeon design here in a little while. But yeah, that's just my thoughts. And I really like the fact that it included not only Greg's original drawings of the map, but the more cleaned up, like Dyson logo style of a map in the back that's more readable. In addition to the notes and stuff that are obviously cleaned up so that you don't have to try to read chicken scratch from a 50-year-old page. But so I'm going to get into what I think is the biggest selling point, because I've often criticized a lot of OSR products for just reproducing rules without a lot of supplemental material, meaning I don't need another interpretation of BX. I have all I could possibly want. I have basic fantasy. I have old school essentials. I have Labyrinth Lord. I would say probably Labyrinth Lord is my favorite of the bunch, even though that whole they give clerics spells at level 1. I don't think that's a big deal breaker. Like I'm just saying, like in terms of like word for word, OSE is probably my favorite, but in terms of my favorite version, it would probably be Labyrinth Lord. Although I do love Basic Fantasy's separation of class and race, because I love dwarf clerics. Anyways, Tonisborg is not just a supplement, it also has its own rule sets. And so this is very much like old school. This is like pre D&D, meaning this is more like akin to chainmail, which is what Arneson and company played with in Blackmoor. And it was a lot of Bronstein, whatever. I don't. I mean, I've never. The consistency is confusing. I've heard everybody say it 2 different ways for years, and I refuse to take a hard nosed stance on what's the correct pronunciation. But it was very much a lot of faction play and stuff like that. But this comes with like there are rules for play. All you really need are 2d6. Now, when I mentioned chainmail because I also mentioned like old D&D, original D&D, because that being said, you have 6 total classes to play with, not 7. So you have like halflings, dwarves, elves, yeah, and you have fighters, magic users, and clerics. No thieves. So, but the cool part about this is it is modular. So like if you decide you wanted to grab white box and plug that into this, you can totally do that. In fact, I'd see you being able to like convert this over to even like BX or even AD&D style play if you really wanted to. I don't think it would take that much work because everything in here is very basic, rudimentary stuff that people have been playing with for decades now, for longer than I've been alive. So like this is something like you don't need me to tell you how to do it because you more than likely have already figured out how to do it. People have been running AD&D modules for BX for 40 years So I know for a fact people can convert this to AD&D or BX style play, so it's no big deal. And then white box, forget about it. I mean, of course it's going to play right. It's literally the nearest sibling to it. So there you go. Uh, I think that's the biggest selling point of this thing. This product is like very much a history lesson kind of thing. Like there's a lot of history in this, and again, this is not really a review because I haven't really gone through it all. This is like very light skim is what I've done. But that being said, um, so if I was going to sell you on this, do I feel like I made a good purchase? Absolutely, because not only is it a mega dungeon that you could just you literally can just go ahead and run, but it also has rules. Like if you decide, oh, I only want to take one book, I don't want to take all these rule books or whatever. This has rule book in it. You know, it's got character creation, this, that, and everything else. And this thing is going to be so incredibly big that like it'll take you multiple sessions to run through because there's 10 sticking floors. So like your characters can kick it old school, go back to the town, regroup, restock, heal up a little bit. Perhaps you want to run it like a West Marches thing where you have multiple sessions with multiple different groups, and so you might have different stables of characters, and they're all hanging around the town, and maybe they even like share their info with each other. Maybe, maybe Blimbob, the stinking halfling, went with this one group, but this one group is going to recuperate in the town, but this other group showed up. Well, he's got a map of the places that they visited already, but maybe they missed something, or maybe there's something over here in this turn that they didn't have time to look at, or maybe they were running short on supplies or something. But that's the cool thing. Like, you literally just need this and a couple of D6s, and you're good to go. I mean, it literally has what you need right there. And I mean, it's a cool part of history. It's cool to look at something like that because, I mean, there's not a lot of this kind of stuff that survives to this day. Who keeps their notebooks from 50 years ago, right? Not very many. So it's cool to see that somebody did that, and especially somebody who played with Dave Arneson. It's special because it's pre D&D role playing. Dungeons and Dragons is only the biggest name in role playing. Like they weren't the first, and they certainly won't be the last. And as time goes on, they kind of look less and less like Dungeons and Dragons as people know it. I mean, certainly like the newest iteration of Dungeons and Dragons resembles nothing like what I thought Dungeons and Dragons looked like as I was a kid. So it's just one of those things where like time goes on, it's cool to see something like this that survives, and it's a fun house dungeon. I want to bring up this point because I mean, when I make campaign settings and I put things down in my hex maps, I will have monster layers drawn it like there will be goblins over here, kobolds over there, whatever. Here's a dungeon. Maybe there's a couple different factions of monsters living in their own layers in that particular part of the adventuring side. But generally speaking, most of my things I come up with have a dungeon ecology to them, and some logic and reason behind them. That being said, I love to have a good old fashioned living dungeon. This is a living dungeon, so you can restock it and like flip the floors and this, that, and everything else. Uh, I love to have something like that because it's cool to have something like that. And I only put like one or two because when you make every dungeon a mega dungeon, it loses its appeal. It loses what makes it special. It loses that mystery and mystique behind it. And so it's one of those things where, I love to have an orc lair that resembles an orc lair. I love to have a catacombs that looks like a catacombs. That being said, it's really cool to sit back and look at something like that because I love to have a dungeon where I just draw walls and there's no rhyme or reason. It's just a crazy place. So let's go check it out, right? So that's the thing that I like the best about this kind of thing because it's like, in a day and age where we take a look at everything, especially nowadays, because we talk about dungeon and adventuring design all the time, right? There's channels dedicated to it, and there's a glut of material available on it. It's fun to just have a dungeon that was just designed for people to play in, and that was the only reason it exists. Like the cool part, like because what made Blackmore was the fact that you had some of this craziness. I remember the story about the halfling or the Hobbit, because they actually use the term Hobbit in Blackmore, because the Tolkien estate wasn't going after Dave, but they were talking about like the Hobbit vampires in that campaign. It's one of those things that stuff like that. It might sound gonzo now, but it existed back then at a time where you didn't run into stuff like that, and you don't. And the crazy part is, you don't run into stuff like that today either, because everybody would rather play a ripoff of Harry Potter's Magic School and call it Strixhaven. And yes, I'm going to throw shade, because Strixhaven is one of the worst dungeon modules ever. Who wants to go to school? But anyways, it's the mystery, the craziness of the hobby hasn't really survived to this day. And it's cool to see something being published that, yeah, it was written 50 years ago, but it survives to this day, and it kind of reintroduces some of that craziness. Kind of runs, I mean, the people throw shade about the Tomb of Horrors all the time, but I mean, that's where Sirac came from. I mean, no Tomb of Horrors, no Sirac. And I'm sorry, but Tomb of Horrors stomps the tar out of something like Radiant Citadel. I mean, that was. I keep going back to the fact that like so much of modern D&D sucks so bad, but that's because with all the craziness and the gonzo stuff involved with the hobby, it's what gave the hobby an identity to begin with. And there's nothing wrong with having logic, reason, and ecology in a dungeon. I'm always going to have it, and everybody's going to always have that too in their games. It's just cool and nice to have a funhouse dungeon. You've listened to me ramble on for 22 minutes now about a book that was written long before I was born. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it. I'm going to upload this. I'm going to send this to Steve Fugit, because he was definitely interested in it. So, as always, guys, take care. God bless. And I'll see you on the other side.